Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you just for your courage in being here. This is a controversial subject, but I think a timely one. Things so much has changed in our lives and in our culture in the last few years that this is very apropos of what's going on in healthcare in general. I want to start by thanking Arnie Mello for allowing this to happen, the director of the Frank Howard Foundation. And of course, thanks to Suzanne and Ananda for making this happen tonight. Thank you so much. Just a touch about me. I've shortened this to give you broad brushstrokes, an overview of what the science of cannabis is, as well as testimonies from patients who have found some help and some relief from cannabis as an herb. We have a mountain of misinformation to overcome. The misinformation not just from 40-some years of prohibition and mainstream messages that told us that cannabis leads to heroin and crack cocaine use, which I'm sure I look like your standard crack cocaine user. So there's that 40 years. On the one hand, misinformation from mainstream media. On the other hand, the misinformation that came from the hippie subculture of the 60s and 70s, of which I was a part, who claimed that it was, the best thing since sliced bread, was going to create world peace, drug, sex, rock and roll, nothing better than a little pot. And that has its own set of misinformation attached to it, and wrong assumptions about the plant and what it's for and what it's about. Of course, they're picking up on a tradition from jazz musicians in the 20s and art, et cetera, that, made marijuana seem like that was the cool way to be creative and inspired if you were a creative-minded soul. But nonetheless, for all the good and the bad of both of those perspectives, we are sitting where we are today in 2018 with a lot of stuff running around in our heads. And I want to ask you all to just sort of take a second to wipe those minds clear. Let's open our minds to a whole new way of looking at cannabis. A little bit about me. I'm not from the cannabis culture. I was raised a very good Catholic girl, 12 years of Catholic school and search movement and civil rights movement and Vatican II activists, all of that kind of good girl stuff that I did growing up. My whole life has been as a social change activist on behalf of gender rights, racial justice, voting rights, prison rights, human rights in general. I've traveled around the world building ties, connecting communities, working with women in black in the former Yugoslavia, helping gays and lesbians in the Soviet Union, gay men particularly, get a hold of condoms during the AIDS crisis. They didn't have them. Working in Nicaragua to help people there who were going through the transition from a dictatorship into a democracy. The height of my international activist honored career was to work in South Africa on Nelson Mandela's presidential campaign, which was the most inspiring thing I've ever done in my life. And I moved to Mendocino County. I'd been coming here since the 80s, but I moved here in 2003 from the Bay Area for the incredible place that this is, the magical place that it is. Got together with a group of women in 2011 who they happened to all be women who happened to be holistic healers of various sorts, yoga teachers, acupuncturists, herbalists, lavender herbs, people who brought in Chinese herbs, Ayurvedic herbs, massage therapists. So we wanted to start a holistic healing center. And it didn't make any sense to us to exclude a particular herb that has been around for 5,000 years. And that herb is cannabis. And so we integrated it into the holistic healing approach that we took. And I became part of the cannabis community. I didn't expect to be, but I soon learned that it had a lot of value for people. It was really worth doing. And I was always drawn to those kinds of causes. So that's just a little bit about me. What we're really trying to do tonight is overcome, as I said already, some of the misinformation from both ends of the spectrum about cannabis. Why do we call it cannabis and not marijuana? The reason is marijuana is an insulting term. It was coined in the 1930s in reference to Mexican immigrants. It's a racist term that associated the use of ganja, marijuana, with Mexican immigrants, and it was a very disparaging term back then. So in terms of the value of this plant and its real meaning for us, we prefer the word cannabis. So our goals tonight are basically to deepen our understanding of how cannabis heals, overcome fears and prejudices, give us all guidelines. There's 5 good guidelines that we've developed over the last, I've been doing this now for 7 years at the Wellness Center, doing education and working with patients on the coast. We're largely retirees. Give guidelines on how to choose and use your cannabis medicines wisely and effectively. And also internal to our own community to try to professionalize the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry comes out of the hippie heyday, drug, sex, rock and roll, lots of good times, high THC, get high, all of that. We need to step up and become part of the holistic healing community, the natural herbal healing community that is seeing a rise of importance and value and popularity in our culture, for the same reason that a lot of our patients on the coast at Dragonfly are, I'm 66, my age or older. It's because they're well informed, they inform themselves, they do the research, they lived through the 60s, so they're not scared to death of cannabis. And we are all facing a range of health challenges, from Parkinson's to Alzheimer's and dementia to insomnia, arthritis, a whole range of things that, come with older age. Not afraid of cannabis, facing health challenges, and frankly, disillusionment, disappointment in the pharmaceutical model because of the various side effects associated with many of the drugs that we are offered for those conditions. So we have, this is, I was just talking to Suzanne before this, there are many what they call senior medical marijuana clubs throughout California. I had no idea till I started doing this speaking thing about 3 years ago. Now I'm going from San Clemente up to Arcata. It's amazing. And people just come together by word of mouth to start to explore how to relate to this herb. It's very, very exciting times we're living in. So cannabis has been around. We've got written records of Egyptian pharaohs writing about using cannabis for tumor reduction in size, for childbirth ease. Chinese emperors Shen Nong and Pen Xiaoqing in 2700 BCE write extensively about using cannabis for all kinds of things, migraine, headaches, again, childbirth often. Much of this you can find in what's called the Cannabis Pharmacy, The Practical Guide to Medical Marijuana by Michael Bax. That's a book that sort of traces what written concrete evidence we have of how this herb has been used for 5,000 years. And by the way, much as the way I talk about this as cannabis and not marijuana, I'll be talking about it as it is. It's an herb and not a drug. That word drug was the pejorative word that was placed on it by Richard Nixon in 1970 when he decided to declare war on drugs, and he decided that marijuana was one of those drugs he was going to declare war on. And those were strictly, as we know by now, economic and political reasons and not medical reasons whatsoever that he did that, took that policy. It's led us down a very difficult path in terms of being able to realize the potential and the value of this healing herb. So words matter. We happen to be living in a place that is home to, by all accounts, the finest craft cannabis in the world. And believe me, there's a lot of schlocky stuff out there, especially with this new green rush we're experiencing in California. By most accounts, between $7 and $10 billion a year marketplace. And you know what happens when you have a marketplace like that. A lot of people jump in. They want to make quick, low-caliber, mediocre products, flood the shelves with them, make a lot of money, and get out. It's called a green rush, just like a gold rush or any other economic rush. That's what we're seeing happen. With all of the money being put out to regulate the different sectors of the cannabis industry, my particular soapbox is the state is putting very little money out to educate patients. There's no money. Where is the pot of money to educate the public so that we're prepared to deal with all of these very low-grade, not acceptable medicines that, in quotes, that are flooding the marketplace? So, we're lucky because we're in a place where a lot of the finest craft cannabis and the finest craft medicines have been made, acknowledged around the world, better than you can grow in the dust and dirt of Afghanistan hills. But back in those 60s, when those hippies brought those seeds in their pockets and got through customs with them and came up here, expats from New York and LA and San Francisco, and they came up to the Emerald Triangle and threw those seeds in the ground, little did they know they would be finding the perfect combination of dirt and water and sun. The perfect combination, because it's mostly TPZ land, timber production zones. So this is virgin soil. What we're having now with the green rush is people flooding the market with, they've torn out their artichoke crops and their tomato crops back in Kentucky. They're tearing out all their other agricultural crops, and they're planting pot seeds to try to get on the money. But what was in the ground before those cannabis seeds were planted? Pesticides, chemical nutrients, things that we don't want in our medicine. Herbal medicine accomplishes healing by kickstarting our body's natural healing processes on a cellular level. We'll get into that in a minute. So we are lucky up here, and I hope to the goddess that this doesn't get lost, this beauty that we have up here in Mendocino County in terms of the soil, the richness of the soil, the purity of the soil, the ability to cultivate and develop craft medicines that are really going to help people. I hope that doesn't get lost to a corporatization that does not honor the value of that. What is whole plant medicine? This is basically what we're talking about. The head of the Drug Enforcement Agency for years talked about how the value of pharmaceuticals for patients is that you can isolate a chemical and create a pill that is shelf-stable and uniform at the same pill you'll find at the Walgreens in Seattle, you'll find in the Walgreens in Miami Beach. But that isolation of those chemicals does not honor the way the physiology of cannabis plants or any herbal medicine actually works. Whole plant medicine is based on the living, dynamic interplay of chemical compounds, the living, dynamic exchange of chemical activities between the chemical compounds in a plant. You don't take one chemical out, beat it to death on a petri dish, and put it in a pill and expect it to heal. Herbs don't work that way. So that model is not appropriate for herbal medicine. Any herbs. I'm not just talking about cannabis, but any herbs. It's not appropriate. It's not effective. It's just wrong. So as opposed to the isolated version that Volko, the head of the DEA, advocated for, we want whole plant medicine. We want medicine that keeps the chemical compounds within the plant alive and doing their best to help us heal. Cannabis is actually comprised of 3 types of chemical compounds. So cannabinoids, we know of 113 at least. Terpenes, which offer the flavor, the aroma, and the taste. And flavonoids. We are, and I can't say this enough, we're in the infant stages of understanding the science of cannabis and how it works. It's been around for 5,000 years healing, but people couldn't understand how. They thought it was because, the stars are aligned right, or I shook my shakeree right, or I sang the right song, or whatever. All the explanations that primitive people had for why medicine worked. That's how they explained it. It wasn't until the 20th century that we began to have the science and technology to understand, take apart, and realize what the close to 500 chemical compounds in the cannabis plant are actually doing. How do they actually work? What's the science of cannabis? We didn't have that basis. Well, think about it. We didn't know about the lymph system till mid-20th century, and it took a while to figure out lymph nodes. I mean, I've had 14 surgeries, 2 hips replaced, a knee replaced, and rotator cuff surgery. Every surgeon I talked to said, I would ask them, what do you do about the lymph nodes when you're going in to cut me open? We don't do anything about that. But in many European hospitals, before a surgeon cuts you up, they bring bring the lymph doctor in to show where the nodes are so they don't cut through them. Well, it's the same kind of thing. We're just beginning to learn about the endocannabinoid system and how clusters of receptors in our body, like lymph nodes, are receiving these chemical compounds and working in our body to start to heal, or to treat at least. It's all at the beginning stages. So what we know, you'll find even in the video you're going to see in a few minutes, references to like 100 cannabinoids. We now know there's 113. Next week it'll be something different. You can't keep up with this. I'm telling you, it's amazing because the research is being done around the world. Not so much in this country, but around the world. There's solid research being done, and it's changing all the time. So the way that this works is that this combination of chemical compounds, this is what we're talking about. The cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids all work together, and they work in something called the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is not just about cannabis. All mammals have an endocannabinoid system. An endocannabinoid system in our body consists of clusters of receptors, CB1 receptors in our brain, CB2, TRPV1s. We're learning more and more about these receptors. This wasn't discovered till 1993. So you can see how we're really in the infant stages of this, but we're forging ahead with learning more things about it in the work that's being done at University of Bonn and Oxford and Brazil and Platense in Madrid and Hebrew University in Israel, where all this research is being funded by the government to do, because they don't have the albatross of a war on drugs around their necks, so they can go ahead and do these studies. They're getting funded to do these studies. We need that to happen in this country. So the entourage effect is that combination, that dynamic interplay of these chemical compounds, and that's how it works. The endocannabinoid system is also influenced. It's not just influenced by the chemicals that it pulls out of the bloodstream as they're sailing by. And I always wondered, like, how do the lymph nodes know what to pull out of the blood system to pull in and start to do what they do best, which is detoxify our organs, clean, How do they know? It's in the RNA. So there's a brain that tells our endocannabinoid system what molecules to pull out of the bloodstream as they're floating by through the receptors to the neurotransmitters and send them out to the body to kickstart our body's natural healing processes on a cellular level. Not superimpose something to suppress symptoms, but actually kickstart our body's natural ability to heal. If you watch animals, they know what plants to eat when they're sick, and they eat cannabis plants, believe me. The other things that influence the endocannabinoid system include lifestyle, what you eat, your activity level. One of the things that, for example, promotes the growth of cancer cells is high inflammation, acid, sugar, and that's a function of a 20th century shift in our diets to prepared foods, to more meat and wine and coffee and all the things that our ancestors would maybe have on the table once a month, if that. It was a special deal. But now they're a regular part of our daily diet, and they're not all that good for us. So diet is important. As well as how we utilize the chemicals. The components of the cannabis plant act like keys. So these chemicals are coming in to our body, and they're keys that are looking for the lock. When they reach the lock that's in the endocannabinoid system, they actually activate therapeutic actions or reactions to reduce inflammation, manage pain, balance brain chemicals and hormones, integrate different biological systems to respond to whatever is sending a message to our endocannabinoid system that there's a problem. So, for example, if you have a rush of cells growing in some part of your body, in some tissue or some organ, there's a neurotransmitter that's sending a message to your endocannabinoid system saying, whoa, lots of cells growing right here. What does that mean? Oh, it could mean cancer cells are going kind of bananas. And so they send out the little soldiers to kill those cells. And we're going to learn more about how that works in a minute. So I'm just saying, our bodies are amazing. That's the short version of that. Some of these studies, I include these just to let you know that, in fact, some studies have been going on for some period.